Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Guys, listen, I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars, and this evening we have a dynamic guest. You know, our topic this evening is diversity and inclusion on university and college campuses. Now, let me tell you why this is going to be a unique experience for each and every one of you that are listening to us tonight. And again, we're glad you're here. Now, we have with us Mrs. Devonia Love-Vaughn, and Mrs. Vaughn is the first African American woman that has been appointed as a dean. Now it's 2020, guys. So let's get this in perspective. Ms. Devonia Love-Vaughn serves as the first dean of inclusion initiatives and student success at Louisiana Tech University. As I shared already, she's the first African American female to be appointed to dean at Louisiana Tech. And I reiterate again, this is 2020. Now, prior to her March 2020 appointment to dean, Devonia served as the Director of Multicultural Affairs. Devonia has been married to Lamont Vaughn Jr., an assistant track and field coach at Grambling State University for 22 years. They're the proud parents of Brianna Love-Vaughn, who's a nursing major at Grambling State University. Now, Devonia feels her family plays a key role in her success as they motivate her to become a better version of herself. Devonia holds both bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Kentucky College of Social Work and is currently a doctoral student at Louisiana Tech in the Educational Leadership Program. She is also a graduate of the second cohort of the University of Louisiana System Management and Leadership Institute. Now, after 14 years in the social work field, Devonia has spent the last 11 years in higher education as an adjunct professional advisor and student affairs professional. Devonia's diverse educational, professional, and personal experiences serve as motivation to advocate for accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Devonia believes that embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are not only a fundamental part of academic excellence, but are also the building blocks for social and civil belongings. So, ladies and gentlemen, we want you to sit back and relax for the next 20, 25, 30 minutes here as we entertain Ms. Devonia Love-Vaughn. Ms. Vaughn, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, Mr. Lars.
Well, listen, the pleasure is certainly ours, and it's always on the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Guys know I don't spend a whole lot of time extrapolating and wasting their time with nonsense. And so it's certainly a pleasure to have you here because you're a nonsensical person. I mean, all the things that you're doing and your ideas about the academic excellence and having people having accessibility, and when you talk about diversity and you talk about equity and inclusion and that kind of thing, we already know that you are a dynamic person. So we're glad that you're here. If you'd like to share a little bit more with us about some of the roads you've traveled, we are more than amenable to hearing those as we move forward.
Well, I do like to tell my story a little bit because I think that this has been my calling. This has been my purpose, and that I'm walking in my purpose. I have had the pleasure throughout my childhood as well as my adult life to live the four corners of this great country. And I say that because when you look at the four corners of this country, literally, I've lived in Florida, I've lived in Massachusetts and Connecticut, Washington State, and California, and then some places in between. I'm a native of Kentucky, and I was born in Appalachia. I am not what the stereotypical thought of an Appalachian is, right? I'm not what people image, although the current generation has no concept of Appalachia whatsoever. So that falls on deaf ears when I try to bring that up with them. But, having these opportunities to live and be a part of different areas of this country and the different cultures that each one of our states embodies has allowed me to have this open mind around diversity, equity, and inclusion. My approach is not myopic. I tend to look at things from as many angles as possible, understanding and knowing that diversity is so much more than visible diversity that people see that there is invisible diversity, and that, you know, diversity isn't this scary concept that everybody wants to make it out to be. They want to politicize it, and it's not really a political thing. This is a human issue, right? This is about us belonging. This is about us being. It's about being present in your difference, being authentic, and knowing that, you know, who you are born to be is okay, you know, and not being judged because of those things. And so I value diversity. I value both visible and invisible diversity. And I'm not afraid to learn about someone else's being and who they are striving to be and who they're growing to be. And I don't believe we should stand in the way of people developing that. And so it's been, you know, it's not always been great, right? Because as a child growing up in the mountains of Kentucky and then relocating to the Northeast coast and having a very thick accent that didn't sound like the Northeast at all, I learned very quickly that people make assumptions, that they stereotype, that they have bias, unconscious as well as conscious, implicit versus explicit. But I didn't know what those concepts were at the time. I just knew that there were these forces that were happening against me that I couldn't explain. And when I would go home and I would talk to my parents about it, you know, it was typically embedded in some type of racism or some type of stereotype. And so that's where I started to learn that, you know, looking at people or just listening to people and making a judgment call about them just based off of their skin color or the way they talk, the accent that they have or don't have, the level of education that they may possess or the parents may have, you know, their body type, the gender, you know, all of those things that make us diverse, right? Religion, whether you choose to believe or not believe, right? Who you choose to love or not love. Those kind of things, I learned those lessons early. I experienced those in different places in our country. And what they did was they helped to make me more compassionate. They helped me to be a little bit more authentic in myself. You know, my parents, my mother was in high school when integration happened. And my father, who's 7 years older than her, never experienced integration K through 12, and he went to an HBCU. So he never experienced that actually until he got in the military. And so when you're raised with, you know, parents who that was their experience, and you're hearing the stories of their experience, that integration wasn't a time where, oh, look, we now have Black students in our schools. Yay! That didn't happen, right? That was their lived experience, and it wasn't, you know, just happy, happy times as perhaps some of our history books taught us. And so it was very interesting. And so when I look back at my childhood, when I look back at my adolescence, my experiences at the University of Kentucky as an underrepresented student, I look at my early career as a social worker and the different work that I was doing throughout my social work career. I know that I'm walking in my purpose today because all of those experiences have been extremely diverse and have given me a background that allows me to come into a new place. I'm not a native of Louisiana. I'm not an alum of Louisiana Tech. And so I come in sometimes with a fresh eye and perspective on things. Not to say that I haven't had the pleasure and the great experience of working with people where Louisiana Tech has been their foundation, both academically, educationally, and professionally. And I gain a lot from that institutional wisdom that they have. And I get to couple that with all of my varied and diverse experiences. So it makes it almost full circle, you know?
Yes, wow, that's very exciting to hear. You know, as you share that, Dr. Love, I want to ask this question, and I want to ask it very gingerly because I don't want to offend any of our Louisiana Tech alumni. I know a lot of them, and we're very close. However, just as you've explained when we started the show, of having had the privilege to live different places, obviously that means you've had the opportunity to experience different ideas, ideologies, and that kind of thing. And that's why I say the question, I have to be careful how I ask this question, because in your statement, you also are sharing that you work with individuals, obviously, who are very well versed, educated, etc. However, their experiences have been limited, if I use that word, to Louisiana, pretty much, Louisiana Tech, maybe even in Ruston, etc. So in that realm, and as we talk about diversity, do you find that sometimes there is a misunderstanding maybe of what diversity really means, as opposed to individuals, as you used in our, I'm happy that you said that, intended and unintended conscious. Do you find that sometimes maybe with some of your colleagues and individuals that you've met, that they have, and I'll use the word difficulty, really understanding what you already so eloquently expressed about diversity and how it affects us as people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes without saying. And I appreciate how you were gingerly stepping around that. But yes, I think one of the things that I've been able to do is spend time assessing the environment that I'm in and understanding where people are coming from. And I think I've been able to paint a picture for those who have had limited experiences outside of Louisiana, outside of Louisiana Tech, that in a non-threatening way, that speaks to how much more there is. Um, I guess the best example that I can give you is in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. I was tired. Now, I was appointed dean in March 1st, and on March 13th, we went into quarantine, right? So we had stay-at-home orders, and our university went completely online. So I jokingly say I wasn't doing a dean thing, because I didn't really get to get into this role yet, before we had to go to stay-at-home order. And, my focus was still on the students and their transition and their adjustment and putting all of our current work online and being a service to students. But also at the same time, being very aware of we're in the middle of a pandemic, but then we started having all these things happen in our country as the longer we stayed in the pandemic. And, we had Ahmaud Arbery. And, I saw people running for Ahmaud. We had Breonna Taylor, and I'm a Kentucky girl, right? And so I know people in Louisville. I have a cousin who is on the police force in Louisville. And then we had George Floyd. And the murder of George Floyd was captured in such a way that you had to see. You had to see, you had to feel. Plus, by this point, right, we'd been sitting with ourselves for 2.5 months and really trying to figure out for myself, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to use this tragedy to help other people who are limited in their scope, who it's not in their purview to see the systematic oppression, the systematic racial injustice that is happening right before our eyes. And I think one of the things that it was so telling was that officers' eyes were hollow. Like, I think that's what got to the core of all of us, right? And so for some who have seen videos before and were desensitized, there was something about this one that was just different, right? It felt different. And again, it could be the fact that we were in the pandemic and we didn't have as many other distractions anymore. You had what you had. And so I just felt this weight. It wasn't that I lost my passion for the work. It wasn't that at all. It was just weight. And I felt the need to pen a letter to the Louisiana Tech community. Not for any type of attention, not to elicit guilt, not to raise a flag to say, woe is me, but to give a voice to those who couldn't voice at the time. I used to say, I want to give voice to the voiceless. What I've learned through diversity work is that there are no voiceless people. There are just places and spaces where people aren't allowed to share their voice. They're not voiceless. They're just not given that opportunity. And so I was like, okay, the Lord has blessed me with this position. So I need to put some voice on it, or as some of the students say, put some bass in your voice, right? And so I needed to tell folks that even in this role, I still worry about family. I still worry about my husband, who is a Black man, who has been pulled over because of the car he drives and because of, he's been racially profiled. I worry about my daughter, who is a first-year student in college. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about our visibility as human beings. And I'm concerned about our students who aren't all from Louisiana, who were literally living in some of these cities that were burning, where, all of these things were unfolding and happening. And I'm sitting in Ruston and it's quiet. Nobody was saying anything. I could hear everything, but nobody was saying a word. And, nobody had checked in on anybody to say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Like, it was just quiet. And that was hard for me because I have friends still in Washington State and California who are calling me because they know I'm in the South. And they're saying, how's everything going? How you doing? And I'm like, people around me who say they love me, they enjoy my professionalism, my company, whatever the case may be. And I've not heard from anybody. Again, it wasn't to elicit guilt. It was to let you know that I'm not okay. We are not okay. People of color are struggling right now. And we need you to do something. And I can't necessarily be the person to teach you how right now because I'm in my own stuff, right? And so I use everything as a teachable moment. So even in the letter, I provided a list of resources that said, educate yourselves, take some time, because right now I can't do it for you. I know what my job is, but right now I got to take care of self so that I can come back to this. And then I left town for a couple of days. No, I did actually. I left and went to Kentucky, but I went to attend to my mother. But yes, so to really kind of wrap up your question, for those who have had those limited experiences, I'm encouraging them to step outside of their comfort zone, ask these difficult questions sometimes, have these courageous conversations with other people, Lean into your students, because our students are extremely diverse as far as where they come from geographically, because we all know North Louisiana is different from South Louisiana. And, you know, when you have a large number of South Louisianans at your institution, there are some differences. And so we can't assume that everybody is alike. And I think that I am like this walking billboard that difference exists, right? And that you can appreciate difference and it not threaten your space, kind of thing.
Wow. Very, very, very positive. You know what? That brings me to something that I'd like to ask you. Would you say that insensitivity, purposeful neglect, or human error are the primary reasons for our blatant disregard of diversity and inclusion of the disenfranchised? And I know you've touched on that in your explanation earlier, but do you feel that there may be a direct correlation to the mental disconnect when diversity is not recognized, or when individuals, as you mentioned, the cop having you can see the hollowness or the lack of compassion for the man that he was murdering and those that were with him. So again, would you say that insensitivity, purposeful neglect, or human error are the primary reasons for our blatant disregard of diversity and inclusion of the disenfranchised?
I do think it's all of that, right? It's bias in all of its forms. It is lack of exposure. One of the concepts that I really kind of break down with students is confirmation bias. So when all you do is expose yourself to information or people or ideas and thoughts that confirm whatever it is that you think of someone or a group of people, that's all you're ever going to think. That's all you're ever going to believe. If you don't challenge yourself to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to empathize with someone who has diverse experiences from you, it doesn't promote growth or appreciation for another person. One of the questions I always start my trainings out with, whether I'm training students or adults, professionals, I ask, how many of you were raised with this ideology that you treat others as you would want to be treated? 100% of the room raises their hand. And then I say, okay, so how are you treating yourself? Because people who don't look like you or people who don't have the same ability as you are not always treated kindly or respectfully or whatever the case may be. So you first need to look at how you're treating yourself, because you're not doing so hot with some of us. And so, yes, there is this lack of empathy. There's this lack of compassion for people who are of diverse backgrounds even. And it's not knowing and or recognizing the history of our country and how systematic oppression or the systematic disenfranchisement of people occurred. You know, people in poverty, I mean, being a Black woman or a Black child who grew up in Appalachia, you know, and some of the stereotypes that come with that, and knowing that that area is very impoverished. And then later on in my adult life, feeling the need to go and work in Appalachia was very important to me. And I'm very grateful that I am married to a college coach, even though it's not the most stable thing in the world. But it has afforded us those opportunities, right? Our daughter was born in West Virginia, and West Virginia is all Appalachia. And having worked there and been at times, it was Lincoln County that I worked in, and I was the only Black person walking around there on a full-time basis. and being in a space where I learned that the civil rights movement jumped right over them because they didn't have any Black people there to even experience, right? So when you lack the experience, when you lack the knowledge and the information, um, it is sometimes challenging, not for everyone, but for some people to experience difference, to experience what looks like fairness for everyone, um, what looks like providing equal opportunities for everyone. And so you get people who then don't even know that they're biased. They don't have the experiences that challenges whatever their norm was. I can remember when I worked for Big Brothers Big Sisters in West Virginia. I was interviewing a prospective mentor, and she was telling me how her father didn't allow her to watch The Cosby Show because the idea that you had a Black father who was a doctor and a Black mother who was an attorney, he was like, stuff like that doesn't happen. That's not real. Well, in their world, it wasn't real. And it wasn't the age, internet wasn't what it is today. And so she spoke about being very conflicted and challenged. Her father was not a formally educated man, and her trying to change his mind. And so she said she didn't get to watch the show until she was an adult. And I'm like, really? Like this is year 2000. 2000, what, who does this, right? And so you have these pockets of people who either flat out refuse to know better. It's like Maya Angelou, once you know better, you do better. Some people won't do better. They, for whatever reason. It's too uncomfortable. Would it imply that, as a Black woman, I'm more advanced than you are? What does that mean? And so some people are just not comfortable with being uncomfortable. And unfortunately, there's some people who just have hate in their hearts. I spoke to a class, I guess it was last week. And one of the questions was, how do I have these kind of conversations with people who are family and who are racist and bigoted and prejudiced and so on and so on? I said, are they open-minded at all? And well, it's kind of hard to say. Those are not the people that you can have these kind of conversations with. All you're going to do is end up frustrated, angry, and high blood pressure. I suggest you go and choose somebody else who's a little bit more open-minded and who is willing to at least listen to the other perspective, to open their minds, to be educated about how our history around slavery has been whitewashed to a point where people romanticize slavery. Like, our ancestors were happy to be in chains? I don't think so. There was a lot of fight there. I had an area administrator in Seattle who used to tell us all the time, you are a people of excellence. That is wonderful to hear when you walk in your workplace and you see that as the motto of your office. But I think about how many disenfranchised people who've never had those words spoken to them by an employer. That, it is very hard to say that insensitivity, purposeful neglect, or human error are not a part of this, because these systems that we exist in were not created for us. If you look at universities were created by white men to educate white men. It didn't include women at first, which is why you ended up with women's universities and why you ended up with HBCUs. It wasn't until, as history laid it out, that integration was made possible. But even then, who granted that possibility? Yeah, there was a fight by a lot of Black folks, but we still had to go to a white man to get those liberties. And so when you're the ones making the rules to benefit you, this is what happens. This is why we talk about systematic oppression. This is why we talk about, when we are looking at institutions and we're talking about inclusive excellence, that we're looking at it from an institutional level, not so much an individual level, because it's so much a part of the institution. Yes, you get to the individuals as you work through that. You don't neglect that part, but you do have to look at the systems that we exist in.
Wow. Listen, final question before I let you go.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm trying to dodge some landmines here. Being a diversity trainer myself,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed over the years when we work with individuals that look like you and I, and even now, when people talk about Black conservatives and Black Republicans and all of that, and this is not a political show. However, I find, and I want to ask you if you find this as well, and your thoughts on it. You have people that have been blessed to have educated themselves to possibly, as my grandmother used to say, have two nickels to rub together, etc. That, in my opinion, simply from my experience, that try to pretend as if they themselves do not understand the atrocities of systemic racism, and that it is not as severe as people that look like us say it is, because they were fortunate enough possibly to escape on the surface some of the atrocities that happen to many of the disenfranchised. So I guess my question is, if you've encountered those individuals, and Lord knows I have, how do you address them when it comes to getting people to understand the cruciality of diversity and how important diversity is? And I know this is a loaded question, and that systemic racism is definitely in place and alive and well.
A lot of prayer gets me through those. I have to say that's a bigger challenge for me. And I'm going to be real transparent. Because I found that in diversity work, it is so important to be vulnerable, because that leads to this openness, right? And then I'm a social worker on top of all of this. So then I'm really trying to analyze these types of individuals, like where is the disconnect for you? And oftentimes, and you have to understand that most of the people that I'm encountering are between the ages of 18 and 22, right? And I just, in my head, I'm like, just keep living. And sometimes out of my mouth, I say, just keep living. Because at some point in time, the reality of your Blackness, for lack of a better word, is going to show you who people really are. We are a people whose skin color is a threat to some people. We are a people who, being in this skin color and being educated is a threat to some people. If you're okay with believing that racism or discrimination or prejudice towards race and ethnicity doesn't exist, if you're comfortable with that and you sleep well every single night with that, then have at it. because clearly that person isn't ready for the conversation that I would have, right? Um, I understand what you're saying, Miss Vaughn, but there is no but here. I'm telling you what some lived experiences have been for me. Well, that happened to me, but it wasn't, they didn't mean it. Okay. You might give them one time, but how many times have they done or said that? There are some people, yes, they want to see the good in others, but there are some people who are not emotionally ready, who don't have the maturity or the fortitude, or they're just not in a place to receive that, or it hasn't been their lived experience. So I can't change their lived experiences. Well, I might say to a young person, let me give you some tools in case this does happen to you. Or if you are supposed to be fighting for justice and you're an adult, you're supposed to be, representing this, but because you've now achieved some level of status and you've been able to work your way through this system, and you've had mentors who were, white males who invested in you, good for you. But you have to look behind you, because there's a whole bunch of people who are not getting that opportunity. So what are you going to do to change that? Are you going to then be the change agent for those people that say that person was for you, no matter what their race or ethnicity or education or background was? Um, you know, Dean Speed, who was the first African-American dean at Louisiana Tech, always said he can't celebrate that until there's another one who comes behind him. And so when I was appointed a couple of years after him, he and I both are saying, shame on us if we're the last, right? Shame on us. That's on us. That's not on the president of the university. That's not on the alumni of the university. That's on us. Because something we did along the way didn't create opportunities for other people to come through. So if you don't want to see that diversity is important, that inclusion is important because you got yours, okay, that's fine. But you better be making sure somebody else is getting theirs too. That is your obligation. I mean, I believe that's why we're here. That's why we exist, to help promote others. Again, go back to that basic fundamental: treat others as you would want to be treated. I ask that question, 100% of the room raises their hand. They are male, female, black, white, all different types of races, all different types of ethnicities, religions, you name it, are existing in these spaces that raise their hand and say, yes, I was raised with this. Okay, so then do it. Don't think just about yourself. Think about those behind you. Make a way for someone else who looks like you. I mean, yeah, that one gets me.
You know what, Mrs. Love-Vaughn, allow me to say, as I let you go, truly, I'm so happy for you that the individuals that you encounter are like the 18 to 22. And allow me to say very honestly and no sarcasm, is I encounter cats that's old like me with that same kind of mentality. And the sad part of it is that I have observed them go through a lot of worse things than I feel like I have. And yet they try to pretend, and my motto, quite frankly, is there to be positive, but they try to pretend that it doesn't even exist, or that it didn't happen, or that people are over exaggerating. And so I hear you so very loudly. But again, it's been great having you. We're so happy that you've shared with us. Hopefully you will return again. Are there any parting statements you'd like to share with our audience?
You know, diversity work, it doesn't end. I don't believe I'm ever going to work myself out of a job. That would be ideal. I don't believe that's going to happen. But it also isn't something, it's a marathon. It's not a race. It is one of those things that if you are in this work, you got to be ready for the long haul. It's good work. It really is. It's challenging, but it's good work. There are small victories and there are big disappointments, but it's good work. You know what I mean? Um, and I am honored. I am completely blessed that I've been afforded the opportunity at this particular institution to be in this role, to grow, to learn, to impart wisdom, to unlearn, relearn, teach, whatever the case may be. It's a opportunity, um, and I'm enjoying it. But I am definitely humbled by it. And I would say that you being at that university in the 70s definitely helped build the foundation for me being here today. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for this opportunity to be with you today, to kind of share a little bit about who I am and my thoughts around diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, but also to speak to your audience today. And I do appreciate the opportunity. And anytime you want me to come back, I am happy to do so, should my schedule permit it to happen.
Mrs. Love-Vaughn, thank you so very much. It's certainly been a pleasure having you with us, and we definitely do want you to come back and join us. And let me share with you on air that the entire time you've been explaining, there have been thumbs going up and hearts going up, so the audience certainly love you, and that's why I'm sharing with you. Sometimes they'll come on and ask questions, sometimes not. They'll put them in the box. So you certainly been a hit. If that means anything to you, you've certainly been a hit. So again, it's been great having you. We certainly want to have you back. We want to say to the audience, as always, we really appreciate your support when you come and you check out the Nobody Asked Me Guys show. So guys, listen, I have been your host, Melvin Casey Lars. Our guest was none other than Mrs. Devonia Love-Vaughn, who's Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at Louisiana Tech University. And we're glad that you came and joined us. Ms. Vaughn, if they would like to contact you, is there some contact information you'd like to leave with them?
Sure. They can email me at my office. Email is always the best way. And that email address is the letter D, the letter L, Vaughn, VAUGHN, at latech.edu.
Okay, thank you so very much. Guys, you know how to contact me. Just go right to my email at abrighterfuture91@gmail.com. You know, we always give you a cell number, 440-935-0374. And as we told you on last week, we encourage you to get your copy of Just an Ordinary George, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Your denial is your conscience. Believe me, guys, it's nothing like you've ever read. It's filled with history, filled with facts, filled with a lot of beautiful pictures, paintings, etc. So you will get a full history lesson along with aesthetics, and you will be able to really learn a lot of Black history and some solid Black history. And I'm going to give you one thing from that book. Many people follow the Westerns, and you keep hearing about Custer and Custer's Last Stand. But what they fail to tell you in the history books, Custer was rescued more than one time by the Buffalo Soldiers. Yes, that's what I said, by the Buffalo Soldiers. And when he went into that last battle that he never came out of, his superiors were prompting him to carry some of the Buffalo Soldiers with him. And his statement was, I don't need any brunettes. Yeah, that's what he called the Africans that were fighting in that war. He called us brunettes. And as we all know, and I'm not gloating about it, he never returned. So just keep in mind is that when you see history, when you read history, do study for yourselves. And it's certainly in Just an Ordinary George. You can go to, guys, paypal.me/brighterfutures91. So it's been great having you guys. Again, please contact Ms. Vaughn and make your wishes known. So guys, have a great night. Ms. Vaughn, we do appreciate you so very much. If you don't mind staying on just a second, then I promise you I will be out of your hair. We wish all of you a good night.